Okay, take two. Hey folks, I'm Storm331, and we're going to be covering the final guide of Final Fight Speedrun Guide. And this is probably the last and probably the most difficult stage in the entire game to go deathless. And that being Uptown. If you thought Bay Area was worse, Uptown is definitely the Mad Gear's final stronghold, and it's basically going to be crammed to the pack with enemies that are going to do their darnest to stop you. In fact, you'll probably find yourself having more trouble advancing than having to deal with the enemies themselves. And of course, it has some of the most dangerous areas in the entire game ready to throw down with you all over the place. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So basically, we start off here. Whoa. That was weird. I've never seen it do like that. Okay. That was weird. I've never seen that happen before. Okay, let's try that again. Alright. So anyway, normally that's never so blurry. Anyway, so now that we've gotten back, so what you need to be doing right off the gate is pretty much start jumping backwards and do your attacks, because the enemies are going to try to keep you from moving forward. And basically, you want to be aiming for to this end point here, because the Andori Jr. and two members of the Headbutt Brigade are going to come running right out after that. Well, at least the Geo Briar does. But technically, most of the enemies you don't have to defeat outside the ones that do emerge, like the Andori, the Bilbo, the Geo Briar, and then all the Jays, the Dougs, and the Breads, and the Simmons. Or whatever comes out next. Alright, so now that you get a general idea of how we do it from a speedrun perspective, there are some things you do need to watch out for when you do start off the run. So basically, when you get off here, you'll start encountering these guys right here. And then right after that, the two-piece start coming out, and then the other enemies come out. So if they're catching up too quickly, don't be afraid to pause and do a special to keep them from coming right after you. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of enemies coming right after you. But luckily, I'm getting pretty darn lucky here with the defense here. Yeah, do not be afraid to whip out your specials, because the enemies will love to get all over you and everything. But technically, if you're doing speedrun purposes, you should always make sure you're doing the backward jumps most of the time, and that's because the enemies are going to come right after you and try to attack you. And of course, like I said before, the enemies will try to intercept and go after you. So anyway, we're coming up to the next part right here. So anyway, we're still in the first part of round 6. And if that part was actually pretty easy. This part, on the other hand, gets pretty difficult. So anyway, one of the things that will be happening is that we still wanted to be jumping backwards, but we have to deal with the Headbutt Brigade, and we have to deal with these enemies. Unfortunately, it gets pretty difficult with all the enemies trying to stop you and everything. But technically, you want to let the Andoris charge at you at the bottom path, and then just do back jumps. But on the other hand, you also have to deal with enemies that are coming right at you, too. But anyway, it's very hard to get past this area without taking a death, unfortunately. As you see right here. So anyway, once you get to this force point, you're going to mostly deal with 2Ps and Js. These guys will love to get in front of you, as well as the Hollywoods. So basically, you want to do either position yourself on the bottom plane, or just basically just get out of the, try to take them all out at once. one thing you could do against these slashes and axles is you basically want to take full advantage of using the extra joy. Now, technically, the first pair of barrels that comes right at you does have food items, so if your health is pretty low at that point, you definitely want to pick that up. But you could definitely use chain throws or extra joys to rip through the axles and slashes. Unfortunately, it's very hard to get past these enemies without taking a death. But at least at the same time, we get rid of the vast majority of them. Yeah, just get rid of these guys before you advance. So anyway, there's technically, if you have plenty of health, you can always use your extras and extra joys to rip through the enemy defenses and destroy the upcoming barrels. You do have to keep in mind of the Hollywoods that throw the Motavo cocktail bombs at you. So do not be afraid to whip out the specials if you have plenty of health. But otherwise, you don't want to be prioritizing so much fighting with the slashes and axles. Now, this area is probably the more difficult area because almost immediately, once we get into this area, the first 4 enemies that we're going to be... Oops, never mind that. Let's forget about that and try that again once we get back over there. Anyway, but basically what you want to be doing is basically try to advance forward as much as possible. Let these Endories pass. Don't be afraid to pull off extra joys if you need to push them out of the way from you. And don't be surprised if you take deaths either, because that happens a whole lot. But yeah, the enemies are not too hard to deal with. Yeah, I tried to do a pile driver and I wound up not getting it because the enemy decided to get in my way, unfortunately. So, anyway, that's pretty much all you have to do. You just want to focus mostly on back jumping and the whatnot. Now, this time we are going to save right here because, unlike what I did earlier, I did not do that. So don't be afraid don't be surprised if I have to take a continue here. So anyway, coming up on this first part, you do have the Hollywoods and Elgatos. You definitely want to move forward as much as possible. It is very hard to do this without taking deaths or getting hit. Plus, you also have any other enemies to deal with that'll basically cause problems. Like I said before, enemies in this game love to get in front of you and basically cause all sorts of problems. So don't be surprised if your attempts to get past them fail and they just cause problems. But technically, you want to position yourself on the bottom plane. Now, this area right here is where the members of the Headbutt Brigade will start coming out to play, pretty much. So if you are running low health, don't be afraid to break those first 4 barrels. And just try to get past the area pretty quickly. Anyway, you'll get to this force point where you're going to fight all these enemies that emerge. Technically, you do want to get rid of the Headbutt Brigade members quickly, as well as the Axle. Those are the huge high damage dealers among the pack. Then, of course, you got to get rid of the rest of the regulars, as well as the J's and 2Ps. Alright, we're going to go ahead and create another save point right here, so we can cover this next part. So anyway, the next part is going to probably be the most rough part, because you do have to deal with Hollywoods and Elgatos. So try to do your best you can to either avoid them or basically just use your extra joy to force them off you. Now, technically they will not go after you if you're lucky. Now you do have to watch out with Poison and Roxy appearing here. They'll be the first enemies you have to deal with. But eventually you will have to start dealing with the Elgato and the Hollywood that joins in. So basically once you get to this point, you want to force all of them into the back corner and just take them down right here. Or just deliver it infinites if you're using Cody and Guy. So basically that's all you need to do on that part. You just got to be more forewarned about the fact that the enemies will always try to stop you from advancing, as you saw right then and there. So we're going to create a restore point. So we got 2 force points before we get to Belgar. This is basically the final area. So in between these columns, you do get point items. If you're playing the console versions, there might be food items to pick up sometimes. So don't be afraid to pick up if you're low on health. But technically you want to be advancing forward, doing the reverse jumping as much as possible. You do have a chance of scoring some health items if you're lucky. Of course, I picked up a weapon. You don't want to be doing that. And once you get past this area, you're going to be advancing over here. And you're going to be dealing with Hollywood and Elgato first. Followed up by the Andoris, and that's also joined in by the Headbutt Brigade. And then finally, Roxy and Poison join the fight as well. So this gets pretty chaotic here. This is actually one of the worst force points in the entire game in the arcade version. And don't be surprised if you take a death here. Unless you're going for deathless, this is probably one of the hardest areas to get through without taking any damage or deaths. Now, of course, if you're playing as Cody, you can also use his ability to pick up knives to take out the enemies pretty quickly and rack them all up to the corner. But Guy does need to do his infinite, so you do need to trap most of the enemies. Now, we're coming up to Belgar coming up. These 2 chandeliers will always drop huge recovery health items. So if you're definitely low on health at this point, you definitely want to pick them up. So, believe it or not, Hagar is probably one of the better characters to fight Belgar, because Belgar starts the fight holding Jessica, and your main objective, of course, is pretty much pin Belgar to the corner. Unfortunately, I screwed that up, unfortunately. Technically, you do not want Belgar to move around as much as he does. Basically, the strat I was trying to go for was basically pin him to the corner so he can't do his old jumping around. One benefit that Hagar does have against Belgar is his ability to deliver body blows, and he can basically prevent him from firing his arrow bolts. If you're playing as Cody or Guy, they're going to have a much difficult time fighting this boss, because anytime he gets punched, he'll fire those bolts into the air, and they have a chance of hitting Cody or Guy, so you need to be able to strike them at a specific range where the arrows don't hit you, but at the same time, you're keeping Belgar pretty much stunned. So I'm going to show you another strat to do with Hagar again, like I did earlier, but hopefully we can get it right this time so I can show you how it really progresses. So we want to start off here, then pin Belgar up here. Hey, yikes! That's like the second time I failed. But technically you want to pin Belgar to the upper right with Hagar, for the most part. So anyway, once you get to this point, you'll force the battle. Yeah, you have to wait for Belgar to come down. And you have to wait for him to come completely down to get hit by the punches. But it's very hard to do, given the fact that if your timing is wrong, you're going to be in for a world of hurt with Hagar. Now, technically, you can also do this with Cody and Guy, with grabbing him right off the gate, but keep in mind, though, it's very hard to do that with those characters. Now, this is basically how you do it with Hagar, if you're lucky enough. So basically, you want to get this going the moment you successfully perform the pile driver, and then just hope that he doesn't hit you with the arrow bolts right then and there. But like I said before, Cody and Guy definitely have a much harder fight to deal with Belger, because if the fight takes way too long, what happens is that there's going to be more enemies coming down the line, and each one of them will vary. Of course, if the Hollywoods and Elgatos come out, you can definitely get one of their knives for Cody to use. And don't be afraid to use the window to perform wall jumps with Guy as well, because that lets him get a little bit more damage with his jump kick when he performs the off-the-wall attack. So that's also a good way for a Guy to use. But technically, you want to use the infinites with both of those characters, but you just really have to be very careful when doing that against the likes of Belgar, because unfortunately Belgar just like decimates your health pretty quickly and goes through continues like mad. So don't be surprised if your 1cc temps go bad or your speedruns go way off than planned, because Belgar is just very hard to do, especially with all of his minions coming out, because you not only deal with him, but you also got to deal with his minions. But technically, Uptown is somewhat doable. It just takes planning, and you just got to really hope the enemies don't really stop you from doing reverse jumping and making your way towards the end. Because, like I said before, this is actually one of the two hardest areas in the entire game. In my opinion, probably the hardest, probably more so than Bay Area, because you're dealing with a large amount of bad gear foes, and you're mostly dealing with the more stronger members of the gang than your typical generics and the speedy fighters. But anyway, that's pretty much all I have to put out for round 6 in general. And my apologies for some of the mishaps that occurred there. But technically, this is one of my favorite games, and probably one of my first arcade experiences in a long time. Way back then when I was allowed to play arcades. So definitely had some fun memories, even with only 1 or 2 rounds on this, obviously. But years later, when I played it on home consoles, it was definitely a treat and everything. I'm hoping one day Capcom does bring this series back for a modern remake, and hopefully, especially with Streets of Rage 4, among other games, making huge comebacks on beat 'em up. You'd think Capcom would take full advantage of that. But then again, Capcom's the king of beat 'em ups, in my opinion, so I wouldn't be surprised if they ever do decide to bring Final Fight back. It's going to look pretty darn better than what they did with Streetwise, that is for sure. But anyway, that concludes my speedrun guide for Final Fight Round 6 Uptown. If you do enjoy the content that I do, please feel free to follow both my YouTube and my Twitch channels, or even sub to the channel on Twitch if you want. But anyway, there are plans for more speedrun guides to come up. The next one I'll probably do is pretty much POW Prisoners of War. Go over the basics as well as what to expect on stages during speedrunning. But that's probably, I'm going to be taking a break from that for a while, but eventually that will be done in the near future. But anyway, I will highlight this and export it tomorrow when I get home from work. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and close down the stream for the evening. You all have a great day, and I will see you all next time. This is RotorStorm331 signing off. Have a great day. Take care, and I will see you all next time.